Hey, Amy.
Hey, how's it going? Doing good?
Doing well. Good to
Good.
see you again.
Good to see you. Like we have some people filtering in here.
You betcha.
Hi, Ramona.
Hello, it's nice to see you all.
Nice to see you too.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. I'm certainly glad it's Friday. I don't know about you.
Yes, me too.
Oh, hi, Dan. Good to see you. Got his lunch. What's a lunch and learn without a little sandwich? All right, well, we'll give everyone a few minutes here. We just hit the top of the hour, so I'm sure people are transitioning from their morning and trying to transition into this. So I know that we had 30 some people that were registered, which was pretty exciting to see. Give everyone some time to filter on in.
Good afternoon. I could
Hi,
decide
Ryan.
good morning or, but I guess it's technically afternoon.
It
So,
is. Good to
How are
see
y'all?
you.
Yeah.
Good to see you. And just an update on the panel, Eric, Bettina is not able to make it today. She ended up having a conflict. So hopefully
Gotcha, thank you.
hopefully Justin's still able to hop in here and we'll get started here in a couple minutes.
You bet.
Ryan, it's nice to meet you. I'm Ramona.
Hi, Ramona. It's a pleasure to meet you. And Eric, I guess I should change my, every time I use the DMAC Zoom, I don't know about you, but I have multiple Zoom accounts, way too many. And it does not let me, every time I change my name, it goes right back to my email. So
Snaps right back, huh?
thanks for including me.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that the panel went well.
It did. Yeah. We had a lot of people that wanted more information. So that was good. It's always fun to have that.
That's great.
Yeah. All right. We're getting some people joining us here. So let's just wait another minute or so and then we can start getting back into things.
You bet.
All right. It looks like Justin's hopped on too. So good. Hi, Carol. There we
Hello.
go.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I had to work over to my mute button.
that's okay.
How's it going?
Good. Good to see y'all.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're getting a few more people logged in here, so that's good.
I just chatted with Bettina right before this because I was wishing her well, thinking that she was going to be able to participate. And she was pretty bummed that she's not going to be able to be here.
I know. She had something come up today, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll have a handful of additional people that are joining us throughout the conversation. And then we are just recording it. So just a heads up that we are recording just in case someone wasn't able to and wanted to still listen in on the conversation. So just a quick introduction for myself. My name is Amy Boyce, and I am the current ATD president for our Central Iowa chapter. And I was part of the group that led the effort for our professional development day on Friday, September 17th. So we had a really great group that was able to join on that day. So we had around 150 people that joined us at the FFA Enrichment Center. And in the afternoon, we had a panel that was really focused on DEI and accessibility, which started a really important conversation, I think, for our talent development peers. And I had a lot of people come up to me afterwards and say, hey, we had so many more questions left that we had posed to the group that we weren't able to get to. And that just happens with panels, right? So we kind of get into talking about everything and we share some really great stories. And then there's just all this follow-up that people are interested in. So I would just say kind of from a recap standpoint, Eric led our panel, and I'll just ask him to kind of walk through with the group and just do some brief introductions, because I know we also have some people that weren't able to make it to Professional Development Day joining us today. So we kind of have to bridge that gap just a little bit. And then Ryan, who wasn't able to make it for the panel that day, is here. And Bettina, who was on the panel, wasn't able to make it. So, you know, it's just the world we live in. We just kind of have to roll with it. So I'm really excited that we got this group back together, and look forward to the additional information. And if I were just to kind of summarize it based on some of the conversations that I've had, I think we had like a really great setup to each of you and your story and some insight into your experiences. And then I think the next thing that we're hoping to accomplish with the follow-up conversation is, now what? You know, like I can open my eyes to a lot of different experiences and perspectives, but if I am working in the talent development field and I'm trying to support people, what does that look like when it comes to training? Or how do I influence my organization or my leaders or the people that I'm working with? And how do I use that information? So kind of like the what's next is what I think many people that are rejoining us are hoping to get out of today. So Eric, I'm going to toss it over to you and I'll be quiet and I'll let you do your thing. Kind of leading the panel.
You betcha. Amy, thanks for that intro and giving an amazing recap. Made my job a heck of a lot easier to tell us where we were and where we need to go. So we're going to focus today's conversation, like Amy said, around sharing a little bit more from our own perspectives and thinking about some of the actionable ways in which we can move this work forward and embed it into talent practices. So like Amy said, my name's Eric Shepard. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner at EMC Insurance Companies, pardon me. And I'm a teacher by trade. So being in amongst this group of individuals warms my heart in more ways than one. So I'm thrilled to be back with you all. I'm going to ask our panelists to go through in alpha order by first name and introduce themselves, which is fun because then we have two R's and then we get to take a look at the screen and say who's next. But I'm going to kick it over to Justin to give us a start on the panel today, and then we'll head on over to the next panelist.
Yeah, Justin Lewis. Oh my gosh, what are my titles? I'm an activist. I am running for city council in Des Moines. I run a nonprofit called Des Moines Selma, and I run a environmental landscaping company that has grown 2,000% this fall. So I am all over the place, and I wear many hats, but I do them well. So I want to make sure that everything is standardized and runs smoothly. So yeah, thanks for having me here.
Justin, we're thrilled to have you and to see that you're literally in a new space and place, and whatever works in your calendar and joining us makes me even more happy that you're with us today, knowing all the hats you juggle.
Yep.
So heading on over, it looks like Ramona, you're up next.
Let me unmute. So thank you so very much for having me. It's nice to see all of you today in the little boxes, or knowing that you're joining us if I can't see you. But I'm Ramona Wink, and I am a licensed mental health counselor with 515 Therapy and Consulting. And then I do a lot of motivational public speaking about mental health and how mental health, in the workplace impacts us all. And so I'm really passionate about doing that, stepping into that space, because like I shared when we were together last time, we are facing such a mental health crisis in Iowa and across the country. And I think everybody knows that, and yet they don't know what to do. So I'm passionate about getting out in front of companies. And if I can do an hour or whatever to empower those people, then that's just joy to my heart, because I feel like, I'm exponentially helping even more clients than I feel like I already do from the chair. And I think we're better together than we are solo. So I'm all about collaborating and entering into space and having deep, meaningful conversations.
Ramona, thank you for that. It made me think as we continue this conversation, as you said, it takes all of us in a lot of ways, right? So continuing that, and then thinking about how some of the things we already do as talent professionals integrate into this work so easily. Meeting people where they are is the basis of differentiating in the talent space. So thank you for sharing that. Ryan, welcome to the team officially as a live participant today. We're so glad to have you.
Well, thanks for including me. After I heard what I heard was a great panel discussion the first time around. That was one of my 3 consecutive weeks of COVID possibly because of outbreaks at Kirkwood. So I'm an educator. I teach at both DMAC and Kirkwood Community College. I'm a consultant. I'm an author, I'm a writer, and like many of my fellow panelists, I'm an advocate, I'm an activist. And that word activist, I was reluctant for a long time to even put on my LinkedIn profile, but I wear that badge proudly. I'm gay, and I'm HIV positive, and I have been for almost 30 years, and that is a big part of my story that comes along with my story as a gay man and how I've navigated life. But as a white gay man with a lot of privilege. And I'm privileged to be here today. Thanks for including me.
Ryan, thank you for sharing those elements of your story and then taking us right into the good stuff, right? Understanding the privileges that all of us come to the table with each and every day, and how do we make sure that we're acknowledging those and thinking about how any of us at any given moment have privilege over others. And so how do we activate that in a way that brings our collective efforts into actionable steps? So which kind of ties into our conversation. So the plan today is, as we talk about action, is to go through some of the Slido questions you all raised. So we'll try to go through those in the order that you upvoted them. If there are other things that come up, we'll try to get through these, but feel free to add those into the chat and I'll do my best to monitor there too. But we're going to start off with some of the most common pitfalls. You know, panelists, as you're thinking about this work each and every day, and you've been in many organizations from each of your different experiences, or maybe it's from leading organizations. What are some of the pitfalls you see when it comes to integrating DEI into the work that we're doing every day? And maybe if you'd offer up a few recommendations on how to avoid stepping in a pothole or running over a pothole or falling into it, whatever that might be when it comes to this work. Open it up to any of you. No rhyme or reason on this one on who might have insights or thoughts there.
I think the first thing is a loss of power or persuasion with certain folks. I know with the space that I typically operate in, I have to remind folks that you're not losing power, but you're gaining allies, or you're becoming an ally for other folks. And the folks that you're going to be allies for typically have been less susceptible to, how do I say this? Practices that we would typically not normally do to people, whether it's harassment, whether it's misgendering folks, whether it's racism, whether it's discrimination. So yeah, I think that's the big thing. It's changing folks' minds, pushing them to be careful what they say, be more mindful of what you say. And you're going to have hiccups, you're going to have mess ups, but take pride in when someone pulls you aside and says, that wasn't probably the right thing to say, or this could be a little biased. Take pride that someone's telling you that, and then make the adjustment from there.
Most certainly. A couple of things I'm hearing you say there, Justin, is the idea of just being open to what could be. So as we're thinking about engaging with others in front of us, whether it's a screen like this in a classroom setting, or if we were live in person in a panel, how can we be open and curious around what's happening for the other individual and not bring necessarily all of our assumptions to how their experience might be. So from that action standpoint, as we continue to try to highlight those today, I think that's one for all of us to encourage in our classrooms and in our spaces, is helping others be open to the possibilities of what definitely could be. Ryan, Ramona, any other thoughts there as we think about pitfalls you've seen?
I'll kind of piggyback on what Justin said. And I think it is a really important thing that when somebody pulls you aside and maybe makes you aware that that was offensive or could be offensive or could have been framed differently. I think just coming at it from an offensive approach rather than a defense, right? I think that as human beings, our natural tendency is to get defensive. I think in the world that we live in today, you know, camps have been drawn and you're either on this side or this side. And so we're always playing defense. And so I think just, you know, from a mental health perspective, trying to reframe that, and not that there's not times when defense is a good option, but how we can think more of from a approachability and how we can build that bridge, and how, like Justin said, if that person is taking their time out to inform you, to reframe that, there's the mental health piece, to reframe that not as a negative or something to get to be defensive about, but to really embrace that and lean into that and see it from a positive. This person is caring enough about me and my professional development to educate me on that.
Just typed in, I heard you say reframing as a gift. That's powerful. And there's another thing I want to swing back to, but Ryan, I know you had a couple things you wanted to say there.
And to me, it all comes down to vulnerability, right? Real growth, no matter if you look at it from 2 sides, 3 sides, or just our own growth and development. Sometimes it is tough, right? We have to be open to being vulnerable and understanding that when someone is sharing that feedback with us, that that person is not attacking you. It's usually the unconscious bias, right? That's acting out. And I think once folks lean into the discomfort, right? But once folks get comfortable with being vulnerable, real change happens. I mean, in my classrooms, in my formal classrooms, I encourage my students, and they're shocked, right? Not really, but when I say something, I try my best to be inclusive all the time, but old habits die hard. And I ask them to, if I say something in the moment, please call me out in a productive way, and let's use it as a teachable moment. So I hope that I try to set the standard, at least in my classroom, by modeling that behavior.
I appreciate that, Ryan, because I think you tied on something Ramona was saying a moment ago around reducing that threat.
Yeah.
So how do we, as we're engaging with others, create a space and a place where everyone sees themselves in the work that we're doing together, whether it be through the words we're using, the visualizations, the tone we're using, so that it's not an off-putting piece where we can give ourselves a break, a mental break, if you will. And Ramona, I'm sure you have thoughts on that as well. But thinking about every single day for a lot of us is a challenge, and the concept of 1,000 little cuts. There's a little thing after a little thing, or a microaggression after a microaggression that we're constantly facing. And so as practitioners, educators, et cetera, thinking about how we reduce that threat state for all of the people that we interact every day is definitely something actionable. Go ahead, Ramona.
Yeah, I think that vulnerability piece, Ryan, that you talked about is something that leaders really need to become educated on, and then not only become educated, but right, walk the walk, right? Demonstrate what vulnerability looks like from the leadership perspective. And I think leaders who can say, you know what, I fumbled the ball on that, or I really said something that was offensive and I own that and I'm sorry. And leading with that is something that people want to follow all day long, because we're all human and we're all gonna, make mistakes. But when leaders can be vulnerable and just say, I'm learning and growing, and please, give me some grace here, and thank you for correcting me, and to come at it from that building a bridge rather than blowing up the bridge standpoint, the world is going to be a lot better place.
Well, certainly. And one thing you just said there, Ramona, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's the humility in that for leaders. How do we help folks be more humble in their approach through the vulnerability that Ryan was mentioning, which ties to the courage it takes, right? You can't be courageous without vulnerability. All you have to do is turn on Brene Brown's TED Talks or anything, right? She'll tell you, and you can engage in that conversation or those books. So when we think about the vulnerability, when we think about the humility, one of the questions that came up at our first panel was around, authentic selves. So lot of us on the panel have already been vulnerable today, and we saw that at the conference as well, sharing stories and whatnot. What are some ways in which you all as practitioners and educators have helped maybe empower others to be their most authentic self? That was one of the questions that came up, and I would love your thoughts on that. What does that look like?
Well, just as you said, when we share our stories, right? As I tell my students, when I work with my clients, storytelling is one of the coolest and oldest forms of art and communication, right? We do it every day. And when we are vulnerable and we reveal our stories, certainly it has a lot to do with how it helps us sometimes heal, right? How we can help others, speak up for others who maybe don't have a voice, but leading by example, by opening up and sharing stories, things about us that embarrassing things, right? They don't always have to be, Dallas cliffhanger kind of drama, right? But something that shows people that we are willing to put something on the line, that we are sharing our experience and what we've learned in an effort to demonstrate a specific practice and encourage and inspire other people to come along. And it usually has reaps a lot of success, I think. People respond to that.
Got some head nods. This is great. Ramona, Justin, any thoughts to add on there?
Yeah, I do. Again, if I guess the people that are on the call, I guess my challenge would be, if you were sitting in my office and you were my client and we were talking about this, then I would say, your homework is to figure out one opportunity this week or next week, I guess, because we're at Friday, but next week in the workplace, your assignment is to be vulnerable with one person in one situation, and then take notice of how that felt, and then maybe even circle back around to that person and have a conversation. I was sharing some vulnerable information with you. I'm just curious on what your perspective was. I think from the first round of the panel, we've got hard evidence that says, I think the reason the panel was successful is because everyone shared their personal story, right? And we were vulnerable. And that's why we're sitting here today. And Ryan, we're so thankful to have you in the midst as well, because people are hungry for connection, and you can't connect at a deep level without being vulnerable. And so that's why I think we've got evidence right here that that's what people want, because that's why we're doing this again today. People want more information.
Ramona, you're saying that hungry for connection piece, I mean, that's primal human behavior 101, right? As we think about really some of the basic, most simple things that we're talking about from an actual perspective, reducing threat, fight or flight, and connection. That's human beings in a lot of ways, right? Justin, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any other thoughts you want to add in there? I don't want to exclude you from the convo here for sure.
Yeah, as a person that's always been pretty openly vulnerable, I'm open book, and sometimes I overshare. In my leadership role, there's no other way that I rather lead than with compassion, empathy, and vulnerability. To let people know that I'm going to hear them, I'm going to understand them, and I'm going through the same thing as you. And I'm no different from you with whatever position I have, with however money I make. We all are bleeding red, and we're all having these life experiences that we're seeking out this human connection to see if anyone else the same thing, and how can we show up and do the same and show up for one another and make it a little bit easier and lift up some of that burden. So yeah, vulnerability for leaders, I would say, is fake it till you make it. But there's a bunch of great resources out there, like we already discussed Brene Brown, and a plethora of other readers and thinkers and schools of thought. So it's squishy, because in this society that we preach individualism and get it on your own, and that self-focus, it is difficult. It doesn't come naturally for some, but for others it do. And I'd say mirror them and you can do it.
Wonderful. And Justin, apologies there. We lost you for a moment, but I think there were a couple things, and Ryan, add on if you heard others as well. Compassion, empathy. There was one other that it broke up and I couldn't quite hear that, but there's some great nuggets of information as we think about small upskilling. And Ramona, you got me thinking about starting small. I put that in the chat as well, thinking about it doesn't take monumental moments of truth. It's the little moments that matter. But Ryan, go ahead there.
You know, as folks we're talking and talking about sharing our stories and our experiences, I was coming at it from the angle of maybe what was challenging in my life, right? Navigating those challenges as a gay man, as a man living with HIV, a gay man living with HIV. The other side of that is how I try to, I have a lot of privilege, and I use privilege in a lot of different ways, but I have a lot of privilege as a white man, right? I'm a gay white man, and so I know a little bit about prejudice, bias, and discrimination. But I'll be honest with you, my experience as a gay man was, the challenges were, what's the word I'm looking for? Balanced out, I think, in part because I'm a white man. And one of my 3 great loves in my life was a Black man. And I only know by walking by him and standing by him and with him, we got pulled over. It wasn't because of this attractive bald guy. It was because of the other one, right? Or walking down the street, or just seeing it. And again, I can't walk in his shoes, but pretty close, to him as we're walking together. And so I talk a lot about my privilege. And when I think about my Black brothers and sisters, my Native American brothers and sisters, who every day, just because of the color of their skin and maybe their gender. And then if you add, right, being gay, transgender to that, or anything else, being multi-marginalized, if you will, I have to say, I don't experience prejudice, bias, hate, discrimination every day as a gay man. I know that my Black brothers and sisters, my Native American brothers and sisters experience it every day. Because of the color of their skin or their gender. And so I look at it as one way that I can use my privilege to open the discussion, to help make things move towards more equity and equality. But even that, when I show folks, I can't even remember what I said this summer, but in one of my online classes, a student pulled me aside, and when I say pulled me aside, on Zoom at the end of class and said, I'm not sure if you were aware of this, but you used this phrase, which I don't even know why I used that phrase. I don't remember saying it. I believed him, and it was offensive to some group. I can't remember what it was. And that's when I asked him to thank you, or first of all, I shared, thank you for sharing that with me. In the future, if that happens in real time, please, let's use it as a learning moment for that. And just a little demonstration like that, or putting the pieces together when, for example, my sister, my older sister the other day said, we were out and about and we Jewed them down. And I said, Tamra, and she got defensive, and we have our own issues, right? But the bottom line was, she, it was just us, and so she didn't see why it would be offensive. And I didn't paint a very effective picture about the extended version of that, right? When we don't know who else is around, your sons, someone else, and we didn't get anywhere until I came back to her and said, here's why I said something, because and then I shared examples when I was at her house, and friends of the boys were talking about fags and stuff like that. And, so being vulnerable kind of on another side of it in terms of showing how privilege can work to help other people, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Not very well.
Ryan, there's a lot of great nuggets, I think, that you just tapped into. Intersectionality, as we think about the identities of folks. And so we're going to circle to that. As you were thinking about meeting, for the example you just shared around your sister, right? Families are sometimes the hardest conversations you can have, because a lot of ways we're ingrained in the way we think. But one resource that I encourage folks to dig into, the Anti-Defamation League out there has a basic framework around, that moment of pause you have. So in Ryan's scenario and what he just shared with us with his sister, it was like, oh, that's not cool. But how do I engage in the conversation? Obviously, he has a personal relationship with his sister, but thinking about the Anti-Defamation League has a framework where they basically, it's the gist of it is think, act, and maintain dignity. So think about the situation, how that's going to affect folks. Is it you need to act, or do you need someone that's an advocate or ally to act alongside of you and ask for that help to say, if I was in Ryan's shoes in that scenario, for example, thinking about, I don't know if I would want to engage in that conversation because I don't know his sister, but I would say, hey, Ryan, could you help me out, right? Because I don't feel, like that I would show up in a way that's meaningful there. But then thinking about the last piece of their framework around maintaining dignity of yourself and those around you in the scenario. It's not about calling out, but that concept of calling people into the conversation in a way that is meaningful to them. And in this situation, again, Ryan knows his sister, but it might be a scenario where he heard someone else say that, and it's a trigger word for him, right? It could be the R word, the F word, the N word, whatever word it might be, where if you say something yourself, you're going to lose it and lose your own dignity. But someone else might be able to encounter that in a way that is more meaningful to actually actionably move the concept of inclusion and belonging even farther. Ramona, Justin, I see you both smiling, nodding, and I don't know if you have other thoughts there, but feel free to add in here and I'll grab our next question.
Yes, just piggyback on that, and also on a comment that we have in the chat from Charles Hoffman. We need to allow people the opportunity to make mistakes and give grace towards a teachable moment. So as we think about, what's the next step from the next step, I think another thing that leaders can do is to demonstrate loving kindness towards themselves when they screw it up, right? Because we're all going to screw it up, right? And so when leaders can offer grace towards themselves, because what happens is, from my office, from my perspective, the person knows that they, fumbled the ball. I don't know why I'm on a football analogy today, but I guess I am. They know that they fumbled the ball. They ask for forgiveness, but then they're still ruminating on that. The anxiety is high, or the depression is high because, oh my goodness, how could I have done that, right? I feel so bad. So I think leaders also need to be able to own that and demonstrate to their team, I'm going to give myself some grace because I've done X, Y, and Z to demonstrate that I'm learning and that the apology is there and that kind of thing. But I think that's the next piece in the equation that they need to model how that would look, if that makes sense.
Well, certainly. Our necks are going to hurt after this. I think we're agreeing so much. I love it. Justin, go ahead.
Looking at the chat, and looks like, yeah, we brought up call out, call in. So there is definitely a time for grace, and I always err on the precaution of grace, but we also have to be trained up on when to call out and when to call in. So if it's something so egregious where they are actively not being able to talk down, or let's, for instance, a Black woman's shopping in the store and a white woman's following her and using the N-word. In that moment, we need to call out. The grace has run dry there. We need to call that person out, get them removed, and check on the victim and make sure they're okay. Places like our workspace, that happens to do the same. But if it's a slip up, and we know that culturally our society can be a little distorted until it's pushed for change, someone could slip up and use the word, like Ryan had said, they Jewed me down. At one point that was culturally acceptable. But this is where people learn. And through learning, the best environment I've always succeeded in were ones with grace and empathy and compassion, not pressure and fear and anxiety. So I always err on the side of grace and room to grow. But we do need folks to call out and know the call out, call in method. So we do a training at Selma called active bystander training, so folks can know the difference of what to do, when to do it, and how to break the silence of allowing that that trend to go forward. So specifically, if you're at Thanksgiving and someone says something negative, typically the room goes quiet. And sometimes that silence can be interpreted as condoning and okay it. So even the word of that's not okay or that's inappropriate can shift the culture, and the children around that Thanksgiving table will see that, and they will have to decide what is right going forward. But don't let that last word or that negative word be the last thing that's said. So call in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Justin, I agree with you there as far as that silence that can be there. And I was trying to monitor. I'm like, is Ryan gonna jump in here? So feel free. But thinking about that piece of saying, even just a pause and saying, hey, did you really mean, or was there another way that you could say that, and giving that interruption, just like we all experience with internet connection. Sometimes it's the interruption and connection makes you think about like what's happening around me, and giving the person themselves the ability to make the correction themselves and add that aha moment that we as educators a lot of the time strive to find. But Ryan, go ahead.
And Eric, sometimes in those moments, a question is very good to break that silence instead of accusations and accusing. So usually what I tell folks in the active bystander training is ask, what did you mean by that when you said that? And then let them explain themselves, and then reiterate, well, this is what the interpretation of it is now, and this is why it's not okay. So you make it, instead of accusing, you make it into a learning situation.
Curiosity, that's huge, right? That's a lot of our learning is around coaching, and how do we ask great questions? I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I don't know everything in the world, and there's no way I ever will, but I can get curious about what's going on and ask great questions. But yeah, I think openness, curiosity, we're talking about empathy, intersectionality today. There's a lot of things as we think about building our curricula that we can embed those concepts into those learning opportunities. Ryan, I apologize. I need to be quiet myself.
This is a great conversation. So we hear that phrase, essential workers, right? Quite a bit over the past year and a half. And I like to talk about our roles in diversity and inclusion, regardless of who you are. We all are essential workers. We're all on the front line, right? And if you don't mind, I want to share an example of share my screen, kind of building off of something Justin said. And I see Dan Toff is with us, and Dan knows me very well. I won't get into the details. Maybe someday you'll well, Dan will probably spread the spill the beans, but Dan knows that I am, when it comes to advocating and standing up and speaking out, that I am maybe for some people a little too much, and I always have to keep that in mind. But there are times. So what I'm going to share with you is, one of the things that we hear often is scroll on by, right? Scroll on by in social media posts. And so I think it was Friday, and I'm going to share my screen. Friday, I was on LinkedIn, and I saw. Can you see my screen? So I saw this great post here from Dr. Mark Williams, and this mother and her family, they did it, right? She got through law school, and they were all part of this. And so I saw this: if she was any other race, you would care less. And I saw it, and I scrolled on by. And then I decided, no. I need to call this out. And so this is what I wrote to this person. I almost scrolled past your ridiculous and arrogant comment, but then I remembered that he had that option to do that as well, right? To scroll on by and say nothing, right? That should have been a joyous event, just celebrated, regardless of who you are, right? So I called this guy out, and this was a complete lack of empathy, stepping away from his privilege, whatever his intent here was. It was meant to rile things up, right? And I use this just as an example of whether it's social media or, as Justin was talking, in person, when we see things and we need to intervene and do something. I do believe there are times when we should not scroll by, and we should call people out, because we live in a society that has, in many ways, gone off a deep end, right, in terms of fake news, and I can call you anything you want, and turning the word bigot around, right, those kinds of things. And my firm belief is that when we say nothing, even to the small, what may seem like a small thing on social media, when we say nothing, we empower those people, we embolden those people, because nobody's calling them out. And I have no problem being that person. I try to, I would tell you, teaching in the classroom has made me a better person. It has made me more empathetic. It's made me more curious. And while I'm going to call people out, I can do it more productively. And so I use that just as an example of that. And if you don't mind, I'll just share one other example. And this was the Republic, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring politics in, but politics, everything's politicized, right? The Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina recently referred to the LGBTQI community as filth. And this is a time where I felt like I should bring this to people's attention, that this is a leader who refers to LGBTQIA people as filth. He even goes as far as saying, come on, meet with me. I'll tell you why this is, true. And we need to call these people out as well. And I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, or whomever says it, right? Our leaders cannot be saying this. The message that sends is so destructive. And I often get accused of being political, right? But when it comes down to it, our identity as a human being and how we're treated, particularly in this country under the law, not just as human beings, but even how things are institutionalized, structured racism, structured sexism, structured homophobia. It's not political. And I believe we actually should be doing more of this kind of thing on platforms like LinkedIn. So that's my example of being an essential worker for diversity and inclusion.
Right. I appreciate your perspective there. And one of the things that I find in the practitioner space around DEI is folks often say, well, we can't talk about that, or that's been the culture that we've been in for a long time. And you made the great point a moment ago around the various dimensions that we all have to our identity. And it's not that we leave one thing at the door. So thinking about a question that we had previously around authenticity, if you're asking someone to leave part of themselves or cover part of themselves while at work, we're going against the goal of trying to bring the most authentic, best person into the organization. So that was one nugget I came to thoughts around there. But then also thinking about this leader aspect that you just were referencing, and thinking about one of the questions that came up in the panel discussion last time, and thinking about the microcosm of the overall society within any organization. Some of the leaders we have and we encounter every single day and have to influence or have the opportunity to influence might have a perspective or might not be as aware to some of these concepts that we're talking about on the call today or the panel previously. So to the panelists here, what would you say to organizational leaders in situations like this? Or if their response, for example, is, we don't have a problem, yet 60% of the workforce plus looks like me and identifies as cisgender and straight. For the record, my husband would tell me, Eric, you make sure that you tell who you are, and I don't want to cover that. So throwing that out there too, that I bring my own dimensions of diversity, and if I hadn't told you, many of you wouldn't have known. So what do you all think about, again, that calling in piece or calling out when necessarily? How do we influence some leaders that may say we don't have a problem or aren't as quote unquote, forgive me, those of you on the call, woke? I don't use that word very often, but they're not woke to this work. Justin, go ahead. I saw you go off mute there.
Yep, I would say, show me the data. Simple as that. Show me the data that there isn't a problem. Because what I have always learned, there is always something going on. Someone does not feel comfortable sharing their personal story. Someone does not feel comfortable going to HR about what they have seen. And it usually takes a buddy system group for folks to air out their grievances. It's a common occurrence. No one's going to air out their grievance alone because they're fighting to protect their job. They're fighting to keep a roof over their head. and they're fighting to get a piece of that American pie that seems like it's still very much slipping away from all of our hands, even more than ever. So yeah, there's something to be fixed in every organization. Show me the data. And if not, let's start collecting data and let's start putting out those surveys where folks can be vulnerable enough where you can get the negative critiques that will shift your culture. So there you have it.
That's fantastic. Data, right? And I'd be curious, knowing that we've got the ability to like thumbs up here. I'd be curious to know if any of you on this call as learning practitioners and talent practitioners collect data, surveys, you're listening. Hopefully you're listening in your classrooms, right? Like thumbs up if you are someone that has collected some sort of data over the course of your time in this space. I'm gonna thumbs up too. Let me see if I can do it. Yep, there we go, I got it. Yeah, exactly. I'm seeing it on almost every row there, right? So as we think about it, that's the power that I heard Justin just describe to us, the data. You can't refute the fact that 100% of our organization says, hey, I've been excluded at some point in my life. I don't know that to be true necessarily, but I'm going to make that assumption today because all of us have had those pieces, but it could be even more granular. As you were just describing there, Justin, it could be in our classroom, it could be the overall employee opinion surveys that a lot of organizations do, or the point in time, or not, it's not point in time, that would be NEOS, but thinking about like pulse type surveys that are happening on a regular cadence, for example. Ramona, you go ahead.
Yeah, I would talk about data from a mental health perspective, right? Is that look at the mental health numbers that have skyrocketed, right? You know, last November said that 44% of Americans across the board were dealing with anxiety and or depression. That was up from 1 in 5. And so, you know, there is data on the mental health. And I can tell you as a mental health counselor, I do hear your employees sit in my office and some of their complaints, concerns that's driving the anxiety, the depression, the grief, is that their voice is not being heard, or the culture is not aligning with how they see it. And so that's impacting their mental wellness. So maybe the mental health piece is other hard data that you can leverage to say, but we do know this, right? And I guess I would say if you've got leaders that are just very adamant and you know, digging their feet in and saying we don't have a problem, then I guess I would try to flip the coin and approach it from the other perspective. Okay, I hear you that that's your perspective and you're entitled to that. But if that's the case, why not just look at it from a, you know, this is just an added benefit that we're adding. Sometimes I think, you know, just allowing them to have that opinion, but approaching it from a different angle. What could it hurt if we add this, right? It's just another thing on our smorgasbord of goodness. And so how can it hurt the culture if we spend time in this space, even if we don't have a problem, which I think we do, but even if we don't, how can it harm our organization by allowing this to take place?
Ramona, one actionable thing I just heard you say there, and then I'll kick it over to Ryan, is validate the person and listen. And if you add a third one in there, it might be validate, get curious, and listen. But y'all can make that pretty on your PowerPoints if we put that together. But Ryan, go ahead.
Well, and I would add to that the data that you know, when we talk about curiosity, I mean, data-driven curiosity about our employees and our potential employees, our candidates, right? So when we think about structural racism or structural challenges that are built into the system, and so I'll give you an example. At both Kirkwood and DMAC, I often teach academy classes, which are all high school students. It's the same college class. Communication and public speaking. They're just all high school students, very highly motivated high school students. And the first semester at DMAC that I taught an academy section was also the first, it was the semester after, I guess we went, so I guess it was last fall. So we were in, well into the pandemic, online. And the demographic of my class, so I'm kind of using my class as an organizational example, but the students were all from the Perry area, okay? And I had a very highly concentrated number of students who were Latino or Hispanic, right? And all of them were significantly impacted by COVID-19 because most of their families, their parents, brothers and sisters, I think there's a packing plant there. Is that right? And so I kind of stumbled onto something in that class about as Ramona was talking about, the mental health challenges that these young people were experiencing. Many of them themselves had COVID at one point. Most of them had lost a loved one that was very close to them. And the mental health challenges that they were experiencing made, I just learned it through kind of absorption, what was happening, right? But as leaders in an organization, when we look for even candidates, right? When we understand that a candidate's experience because of where they might live and where they might have not very good access to Wi-Fi, right? As is the case with many of these students, how Wi-Fi can even be a disadvantage and a demotivator for finding the right candidates, right? So it's not just about the questions we literally ask, right? It's looking for the data that's out there that is creating an experience for candidates and employees that in itself is inequitable for a number of people.
Fantastic points, Ryan. And I'm going to circle us back here as you were talking a few pieces there around the community level, and we're thinking about the mental health piece. And one of the questions we had from the panel a few weeks back was around how do we help educate our communities, our organization around overcoming the stigma of mental health, knowing that all of these things are coming out, every single one of us, each and every day. Ramona, I'm going to turn my chair directly to you, knowing you are a resident expert, but what are some of your thoughts there? And then of course, we'll open it up to Justin and Ryan too, if they have any other thoughts.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to one piece, Eric, about the data.
Of course.
I used this slide in a presentation that I gave yesterday to an insurance company in Waterloo. But I think you can approach those leaders who don't say that it's a problem to talk about turnover rate and then just talk about, could it be possible, right? Ask that curious question. Could it be possible that some of our turnover might be affiliated with that? And then let's talk about the cost of turnover. One of my slides said that every time someone leaves your company, it costs half of that person's salary to up to 2 times. That's a self-inflicted wound that businesses are imposing upon themselves. So if nothing else, I think you can circle back around, use that data to say, this is money that we're spending that we shouldn't have to spend. As far as the mental health crisis, I can talk about this all day long, but it is time for corporations to put money where their mouth is and bring in speakers about mental wellness. Everybody wants to do something, and then yet they don't know what to do. So there's a lot of great resources out there. Iowa, the Healthiest State Initiative, that's the Make It Okay campaign. So they've got good resources. There's a mental health first aid curriculum that some people teach. I teach it from a more from my chair perspective, what I'm learning from my clients in the chair and what I'm trying to teach clients. So companies have to step up and put money where their mouth is. And when I do the speaking, the companies have gotten such great feedback. Thank you so very much for bringing in somebody to have these conversations. And it just increases your employees' believability that you are hearing them and wanting to do something about it. So there's a lot of great organizations out there, but do something.
Justin, I don't want to step on Justin's toes.
Eric, what was the question one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, great. The clarity, right? Clarity is kind, right? So thinking about how we can help educate our communities. And so, as someone yourself, Justin, I would imagine you have some perspectives on how we educate our communities around the mental health stigma. And Ramona listed a few organizations that we could connect with and whatnot, but what are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's put like Ramona said, is organizations putting their money where their mouth is. They hold a plethora of the nation's wealth, and when corporations put that money behind policymakers and elections, that changes a lot. So definitely these companies that are preaching equity and inclusion, I want you to double down and actually maybe stop paying both paying both politicians on both sides of the aisle, and paying the ones that are actually rooted in that belief system and held to the core. Because you know, at the end of the day, money makes the world go around. So utilize it the proper way to make the most impact and change for people here in America. So yeah, and maybe look at your organization and ask yourself: are we a barrier to environmental justice? Are we a barrier to social justice? And remove yourself and change course. So there's a lot that can be done. And we can I have answers for hours, but those are the quick ones.
Love it. Ryan, it looked like you're going to say something, and then maybe we can go our last question and do our lightning round.
I was just going to add, so to build on everything that has just been said, particularly what Ramona was talking about. So I'm on the board of directors for an organization called Project Safe of the Cedar River Corridor area. And that foundation started, I had a student whose brother, while that student was in my class, his brother was a senior at Cedar Rapids Prairie, and he committed suicide. Then his family asked me to be on the board as we, our focus is on saving lives one life at a time, particularly this high school and traditional college age students, connecting them to the resources they need. And when I talk about LGBTQIA+, I realize that part of what I have as I look forward in the path in front of me, the road in front of me is far less longer than what's behind me. Part of my responsibility is looking out for those who are coming up behind me. And there's a crisis in two crises in the LGBTQIA+ community. One is homelessness, and the other is suicide. LGBTQIA+ teens are 3 to 5 times more likely to attempt and succeed suicide than their peers. And that understanding that and being empathetic and compassionate and looking beyond the data, when we think about, people, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Code switching. What is the phrase I'm looking for at work, right? Whether you're a person of color, whether you're LGBTQIA+, that's a mouthful, or you have that intersection, right? And the mental health challenges that come with, diversity and diversity that's marginalized, right, are, out of this world. And I think part of our job as essential workers is looking for that, understanding that as somebody particularly who, let's say a Black transgendered woman, right? The intersectionality of in any given day, right? She's experiencing things that I can't even imagine, right? That are probably impacting her mental health and ability to, at best, thrive, right?
Most certainly. And Ryan, as you were talking there, thinking about those that have to code switch, those that have to cover each and every day, there's a hunger to understand what we actually actionably can do. So I'm going to tie me into our lightning round real quick, and would love to hear one actionable recommendation each of the panelists have for the group as we continue to share, obviously knowing this conversation is going to have to be an ongoing discussion amongst learning practitioner and talent practitioners to make change in the world. But in this moment in time, Ramona, you're on my left here, and I'm going to go Ramona, Ryan, Justin across my screen. What recommendation would you have to the group as we think about actionable steps we could take?
I would take back to your leadership. You can't afford not to put money behind this. That's the way I would sell it. You can't afford not to. So bringing in speakers, after we had the panel discussion, I had several people come up to me and say, the panel should go on the road, right? And Ryan, yet now you're included in that. So a really easy thing to do is to hire a speaker, or, it would take a lot of coordination and stuff, but, and of course, we have to be paid for our time usually because we can't, not work, but maybe they do say, yeah, I want to bring that panel to my company, right? And have a roundtable there. I'm not speaking for you guys, but I would be very willing to do that. So put money where their mouth is, and let's make a difference together.
Back to together. It takes all of us. Go ahead, Ryan.
We are stronger together. I'll add to that in a slightly different way. this is the prime moment, right? When we hear about the Great Resignation, and it's only, you know, if you look at the U.S. Census data, the talent shortage is only going to get worse. It's more challenging, right? If we want to keep chugging along at this, you know, having an economy that, you know, we have, finding great workers and keeping them is going to be a challenge, but it can also be a prime opportunity, and this is a big part of it, right? So absolutely.
Justin, last but certainly not least, and then we'll go head it back over to Amy at the top of the hour.
So I guess this is more of an individual basis, and then it can be expanded more globally, but to the individual, take some time out to learn some experiences and perspectives that are not like your own. Learn, if you're a white woman, learn about Black feminism and how it's different and how you can show up. If you are a white male, learn about the Black perspective, learn about the school to prison pipeline, learn about something that is not like your own. And that will prepare you to be able to show up and speak in a way that you know what you're talking about, and be able to call your organization in, your family in, and other folks. But just start with one perspective. Read a book. There's so many resources. Just pick up a book and just start your journey of learning. Or what I call it, your journey of unlearning.
There you go.
So yeah, for the individual, that's what I would say.
Learn, unlearn, and relearn. Justin, Ryan, Ramona, thank you so much. Amy, back over to you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Eric, for coordinating the conversation today. We got through a lot of information. I know that I learned a lot. I know I have a lot to unlearn, Justin, so thank you for that. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you willing to connect with our ATD community again and doing this part two. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day. And I'm sure each of you would expand the conversation even further if someone had additional questions. So I'll redirect them if I get them my way. Okay. Okay. Thank you all. Bye-bye.